Please start. We are live.
Good evening, friends. Welcome to the 51st edition of the PG Track program of Daily CSI. Your own program, teaching program, successfully running for almost more than 1 year. Last week, we had a great interaction with our students, had wonderful cases and traces and hemodynamic data. It was wonderful interaction. Many of people have written to me, and next week again, we'll be having the similar session. Today, we have the privilege of having Dr. Balachander with us. Sir is a great teacher, and today we are going to have a session on low pressure TR. Again, this is an example case. Low pressure tricuspid regurgitation. What is the approach? What are the concepts? What are the nuances? What are the current approaches that you should be following? And this particular talk will be available on our YouTube channel, PG Track CSI Delhi branch. In case you have any questions and comments, we'll be very happy to answer them. Please write to us in the chat box and we'll take all these questions in the end. Along with me in this journey, I have Professor Girish MP, my colleague, and Professor Sumod Kurian, my colleague, who are going to moderate this session today. So over to you, Dr. Sumod, to please welcome sir and start today's session.
Once again, very warm welcome to this PG Track program. It is a great privilege to have Dr. Balachander with us, as we already had a couple of sessions with sir, and you all know that sir is an excellent teacher. Sir is one of the most widely sought examiner for both DM and DNB exams, and we have really enjoyed the previous two lectures. Today's topic is on low pressure TR. And the main issue with low pressure TR is, it is not very common to find such cases, and because of that, one may not be so familiar with the findings and how to present the case. So it will be a good opportunity to learn from such an experienced teacher to how to interpret the findings and also to say the differential diagnosis. Welcome, sir. Please come and teach us on this topic, low pressure TR. Welcome, sir.
Okay, thank you so much, Subodh, Professor Mohit, Professor Girish, and can I have the first slide, please? Once again, it's my privilege and thank you. I have to thank many times. Professor Mohit is saying, I'm going on saying thanks, but anyway, these are the only things which give us the opportunity to interact with the PGs, which I do, of course, in JIPPER also. So let's talk about this clinical approach to low pressure TR. Can I have the next slide, please? So in the examination, the student is always asked definitions, and they will say, supposing I say, ask you to define a low pressure TR. What do you exactly mean by a low pressure TR? Now, you know that the usual TR which occurs is secondary to pulmonary hypertension. So the answer to this is a more than mild tricuspid regurgitation occurring in the setting of lower systolic pulmonary pressures. And how much is a pulmonary artery pressure is defined as less than 55 in most of the series. And that is low pressure TR. Of course, there is a secondary TR. The first one is a primary TR. The secondary TR can occur in RV infarctions or dilated cardiomyopathy, etc. So the important thing is to remember the pulmonary artery pressure systolic of 55. Less than that is low pressure TR. Next slide. So this slide is just, it's available everywhere. It's taken from the guidelines, which tell you, like any valve disease, this is also the stages of tricuspid regurgitation. But it gives a postgraduate an overall view of what to say when you see a TR. Of course, forget about the at risk of TR because the patient comes with progressive TR or asymptomatic severe TR or symptomatic severe TR. So if there is progressive TR, can be, of course, mild, it can be moderate. This is all diagnosed by echo. There's no clinical approach in this. Asymptomatic severe TR comes when you notice the JVP, and of course, again on echo, and symptomatic is when there is RV systolic dysfunction. Next slide. And these are the etiology of pure tricuspid regurgitation. This is taken from Grunwald only. This is, you can always, all the postgraduates can read it, but just to enumerate the causes in the exam, what are the causes of low, even if you get a case of high pressure TR, they will ask what are the causes of low pressure TR. So you can say in the exam tension, you will not be able to tell all, but at least if you tell about 5 or 6 out of these 10, the important ones are, of course, infective endocarditis, which are common in drug addicts. FC anomaly is an important cause, and mitral tricuspid valve prolapse, carcinoid syndrome, etc. So these are the causes and mechanisms of pure tricuspid regurgitation. With this, let us go straight away to the clinical appraisal. Next slide. We'll come to some of the conditions later on because the accent is on clinical. So in the absence of pulmonary hypertension or right ventricular failure, you know that tricuspid regurgitation is well tolerated, but only when the pulmonary arterial hypertension and the TR coexist, the cardiac output starts declining. But if you have primary TR, the symptoms can be present as a result of reduced cardiac output. It can be more importantly ascites, a congestive hepatomegaly, a massive edema, a throbbing pulsations in the neck, etc. Systolic pulsations of the eyeballs also have been described. Exophthalmos patients can present with, and many patients we have mitral valve disease. But if they have mitral valve disease, what is known as mitral stenosis with organic TR, the symptoms of mitral valve disease will predominate. And what happens is, after that, the pulmonary congestion will abate and the TR develops. That's why a very common sentence is used that these patients will purchase dyspnea at the price of fatigue. This is what is told, that they will get rid of their dyspnea, but the fatigue weakness will supervene on these symptoms. Now, this is just, I lost one slide in this, I had deleted. Supposing a 37-year-old or a 20 to 30-year-old patient comes with these symptoms. So he's got ascites, he's got cyanosis, some cyanosis, of course, that you will notice only with the examination. There is some history of jaundice, there is hepatomegaly, there is edema, there is fatigue and dyspnea. And remember, one of the commonest questions is, what is the earliest symptom of a right heart failure? The earliest symptom of right heart failure is a right upper quadrant pain, largely due to the stretching of the Glisson's capsule of the liver and perhaps a pain on the right. So this is the presenting symptoms. Other than cyanosis, many of them can be present. Next slide. On physical examination, just go to the physical examination, please. Next slide, please. You can go to the next slide. Next. On physical examination, the important thing is a bilateral pedal edema, abdominal distension, mild exernosis. So once in the examination, when you see somebody with ascites and with a pedal edema or only ascites, you will think of constrictive pericarditis as an important differential diagnosis. But anyway, be on the lookout of something different, and low pressure TR comes in the differential diagnosis of constrictive pericarditis also, because the presenting complaints may be same, but they'll be slightly different, and you will have to look carefully at it. So you have bilateral pedal edema, you have abdominal distension, and sometimes, as I said, exophthalmosis. This sign is described called olive green skin, but it is seen only in very fair people, perhaps. We don't see it much, a combination of mild jaundice and cyanosis. This can occur not only in low pressure TR, it can occur in all congestive hepatomegaly also, a combination of mild jaundice and cyanosis. Of course, this patient, let us say, has a BP of 146, normal blood pressure, irregular pulse, because the atrial fibrillation is very commonly found in this condition. And the JVP has markedly elevated, and a CV wave with a rapid Y descent is present. We will discuss these points about JVP in little detail. Now, the important thing of cardiac examination will reveal an overactive precordium and a diffuse apical impulse. The precordial palpation shows systolic retraction and says best felt in the lateral chest wall in the left lateral decubitus position. Note these points because we will discuss it as it goes on repeatedly. The most important thing in this situation is P2 is not palpable, and that rules out significant pulmonary arterial hypertension. On auscultation, the first heart sound is normal. There is an expiratory or white split of the second heart sound, a palpable and an audible S3 at the sub-xiphoid level. Now, again, I will stress the importance of auscultating at the sub-xiphoid level because that is a tricuspid inflow portion of the right ventricle. And a grade 3 systolic murmur, which is very characteristic, and a short MDM at the, these are all, actual scenarios, but all of them need not be present in the same patient. And of course, the most important thing, the abdomen will show free fluid and the liver may be tender. So these are the important thing, and the systolic pulsations of the liver has to be noted. Next slide. So this is the grade 3 left pansystolic murmur. Next slide. The patients with severe TR will have weight loss, cachexia, they'll have, as I told you, atrial fibrillation is common. Remember that the X descends or the X prime descends may disappear as TR sets in. And you get a prominent systolic wave. This is called as an S wave, and this is a CV wave. More important than the here, you have to look at the descent. And the Y descent is very sharp because that rules out a coexisting tricuspid stenosis, in which case it may be missed. So you have to look at the descent, and when you're presenting, you have to say that there is a CV wave with a prominent Y descent, showing thereby that you have looked for tricuspid stenosis. There can be a venous systolic thrill and a murmur in the neck itself, sometimes with severe TR. And the RV impulse is hyperdynamic and thrusting quality. Now, systolic pulsations also can be present on a enlarged tender liver, and they can have all the features of a congestive cirrhosis. They have ascites, and they'll have a lot of pedal edema. Next slide. Surprisingly, if you ask them, they will say about dyspnea, but dyspnea is not a feature. Next slide. On auscultation, the murmur of TR may be very subtle, and this is what is important. It may be short duration murmur. Only when there is atrial fibrillation, the murmur becomes a little longer duration. The murmur is very characteristically decrescendo in time. It's very short duration. So when the TR occurs in the absence of pulmonary hypertension, that is in, say, infective endocarditis or after trauma, and remember, even in a place where a lot of pacemakers are done, like say GB Pant and all, we were asked to auscultate after insertion of a permanent or even a temporary pacemaker, and you can hear the murmur of tricuspid regurgitation. Nowadays, with multiple leads and with defibrillator leads, you will get quite a bit of TR murmur, which can be heard in every patient. Of course, it doesn't produce any great symptoms, but still it is one of the causes of a low pressure TR. So the third heart sound is, I'm summarizing again, I'm not gone to the depth of the symptoms, signs, as S3, which is originating from the right ventricle, and this also gets accentuated in the inspiration. Learn to auscultate and feel the S3 in the subxiphoid area, because that's the most important area. Occasionally it can be felt at the apex, but the important place is the subxiphoid. Now, as I told you, the important thing is to rule out pulmonary arterial hypertension. The P2 will be palpable, it will be accentuated. The systolic murmur is high-pitched pansystolic murmur, and that is why, because of the gradient, because it's a high-pressure TR. In low-pressure TR, the murmur is characteristically low-pitched. The right ventricle will be dilated. It will have, it will occupy the apex, and that is where the problem will come for the person who is trying to diagnose it at the examination. Now, when we come to dynamic auscultation, next slide. Dynamic auscultation is a very important point of TR. Next, please. Next slide. And the most important part of the dynamic auscultation is called Carvalho's sign. And this is the inspiratory increase of this TR murmur. And why does it occur? The inspiration is associated with an increase in the right ventricular size, increase in the tricuspid valve annulus dimension, increase in the regurgitant orifice area. So remember that when the failing ventricle can no longer increase its stroke volume with the patient in the recumbent or sitting position, you can try to elicit the same sign by making the patient stand. So the important thing of Carvalho's sign is making the patient stand and see, or of course, if it is that obvious, in the supine position. Now remember, the murmur also increases during Muller. We don't do much of Muller's maneuver, but exercise can increase, and leg raising, which is perhaps a forgotten art of dynamic auscultation. You can do leg raising in many cases, and leg raising can be done, like in HOCM also you can do leg raising and hepatic compression. So this is the increase of the murmur with this dynamic auscultation. The difference of Valsalva is, what is the relation of this murmur to Valsalva is that it demonstrates an immediate overshoot after the release of the Valsalva strain. There is a reduced in intensity and duration in the standing position. And during the strain of the Valsalva maneuver, the murmur reduces in intensity, but overshoot occurs very quickly as opposed to left side murmurs, which will take a little time to augment. So increased AV flow, flow across the tricuspid valve may cause a short early diastolic flow rumble. It will resemble an S3. And remember, because tricuspid valve is a very anterior structure, this murmur may look just like an ASD. It will look like a rub. It will look like a very short diastolic rub, as you see. That is why even in Epstein's anomaly, they call this as a diastolic rub, which you get in because the tricuspid valve is very anterior. Sometimes if the tricuspid valve prolapse as a cause of this low pressure TR, you can get a non-ejection click. You can get a murmur click which is more prominent at the lower left sternal border. And with inspiration, the click will occur later and the murmurs may intensify and become shorter in duration. Next slide. Now, the other clinical findings and the most important, which actually in the exam we tend to forget, or the candidate fails to notice, is the JVP. A lot of information is gathered from the JVP, and if the JVP is missed in low pressure TR or in TR, whatever TR it is, then it becomes a little bit problem for the candidate. So look at the JVP always, and we will deal with it a little later in a little bit more detail. So first is a systolic wave in the venous pulse. There's a large V wave and impulse in the right ventricle. Of course, very severe TR can produce, as I said, some systolic pulsations in the neck, or lateral bobbing movement of the head also can occur. And a systolic murmur is heard on auscultation. Now, the problem is TR murmur is generally heard best in the left lower sternal border, but they say that a TR murmur cannot go up to the base of the heart. But in low pressure TR, primary TR, when it is very severe, you can still hear this with a thrill, sometimes in the second left intercostal space, third left intercostal space, etc. This can be heard. But remember that the maximum intensity is in the left lower sternal border. So this is just to tell you why we are talking about, next slide, why we are talking about the V wave. Now, can we go to the next slide? Why are we talking about V wave? After all, you see, V wave is a filling wave of the right atrium, and it occurs largely in systole when the tricuspid valve is closed. Now, this is not the mechanism of the V wave in TR. TR, the V wave occurs because a large regurgitant jet occurs, because there is no closure of the tricuspid leaflet. So that jet is directed towards RV. Now, this is because the contraction of the RV is slightly different from the contraction of the LV. The RV does not contract by the lateral walls coming together. The RV contracts mainly by up-down motion. First down and then up to push it into the pulmonary vessel. So when it comes down, when the RV contracts and it is pulled down, there has to be an X descent. In tricuspid regurgitation, this X descent is gone, simply because at that point of time when the RV contracts, the blood is regurgitated back into the RA. Next slide. So this is just to tell you that the mechanism of RV contraction. Next slide. So in the JVP, if you see in detail, there is a loss of X, or what is called as a X prime descent. You get a higher V wave and you get a deep Y descent. So it is logical to call this atrial wave caused by TR a V wave. That is why some of the books, including Bronwald has mentioned, call it an S wave as a result of a different mechanism than the usual V wave. Otherwise, anything which fills the RA will cause a prominent V wave. Then you come to the lateral head bob, and it can be a disproportionate systolic filling of the right internal jugular vein, which is in direct line with the SVC. And of course, you can get a tall, deep X descent. Next slide. So when you go to the large V waves, there is a greater RV filling and a deeper Y descent, and this is called as a Lancisi sign. These large V waves are fused with the C wave and causes a CV wave. And there is an increased influx of blood into the right internal jugular vein. You can get a large V wave in ASD also, which has a deeper X descent. So if you have deep X and deep Y, and then it is more common with the ASD, or sometimes with absent precordial hyperdynamic circulatory states. So the important thing is the X descent should go and the Y descent should become large. Sometimes when you get severe right ventricular hypertrophy or right ventricular outflow tract obstruction or heart failure, where the RV EDP is raised, the RA pressure is already high. So you can get a prominent V waves. So in the examination, sometimes, next slide. Of course, this is the CV wave as the TR progresses. We will come to this when we talk about mild, moderate, and severe TR. Next slide. And this is the Y descent, which is a slow descent, which occurs in TS. But here it is a rapid descent. So, but this Frederick sign, which is seen in constrictive pericarditis, is different from the rapid Y descent of TR. What is it? This is a rapid, sharp Y descent without a V wave prominence. And that is very characteristic of constrictive pericarditis or restrictive cardiomyopathy. Remember that that is the difference between the lateral, low pressure TR, which has a high V wave and a sharp Y descent, versus a constrictive pericarditis. The constrictive pericarditis will have a sharp Y descent without a V wave prominence. And that's an important difference between this Frederick sign. And so you can get exaggerated Y descents. You can get in many conditions. It need not be a low pressure TR. So you have to differentiate between all this. We won't, next slide. We won't go into the details of these conditions. Let's go to the next slide. And these are some of the causes of a high V wave. Next slide. In the JVP, like TR or ASD or hypervolemia, etc. So this can be used to differentiate, and I've already told you the difference between a constrictive pericarditis. I'll come back again in the tabular column when I differentiate high pressure with low pressure TR. Next slide. Now, the important thing is not to miss this. The JVP sometimes will mislead you in the examination. That's the basis of cardiovascular system, seeing the JVP. It can be increased right up to the cranial vault, and you won't be able to see the JVP at all, although that's quite rare because in tricuspid regurgitation, you will get a full JVP. But so you have to look for it. You have to make the patient almost vertical and try to see whether you can see the JVP. One question which is asked is that if you don't see the JVP or it is increased right up to the cranial vault, how do you calculate the jugular venous pressure? We can use what is known as a Gartner's method. That is, you identify a prominent antecubital vein in the superficial vein in the forearm, raise the hand from the level of the sternal angle to the point where the veins collapse. This is a little old method which was used, and the distance covered from the sternal angle till the disappearance will give you the JVP, which is erased. So this is called as Gartner's method, which can be used. Next slide. Now, what about the palpation in low pressure TR? This is very important. It has to be done and demonstrated. So in contrast to the left parasternal heave of high pressure TR is very easy to demonstrate because you will know that there is a sustained heave. And in the subxiphoid region, the RV is felt as an impulse. Just like you have a sustained apical impulse in LVH, you will find it in the RVH. But in low pressure TR, you will not get this. You will get a lateral retraction seen with severe TR. This is where the importance of lateral retraction is. Not so much for diagnosing RV or LV. You have to find out what is seen in the apex. Is RV or LV? Look for the lateral retraction, which is an abnormally large inward movement of the apical region, which is formed by the dilated RV. When you go for lateral retraction, always there's a differential diagnosis of broad bend sign, which is seen in constrictive pericarditis, that it's a lateral. We are not talking about that lateral retraction. We are talking about the lateral retraction simply because it's a low pressure TR, and once the isovolumic contraction is lost, so when the RV contracts, it retracts. So there is an anterior thrust of the RV against the left parasternal region, which is a ballistic recoil of the RV as it ejects the blood through the incompetent tricuspid valve. So this is called as RV rock. It is not called as a left parasternal heave. It is called as a RV rock, the very characteristic sign of a low pressure TR. But remember, in Epstein's anomaly, you will not get it simply because there is no RV there. No pulsation will be seen below the third left intercostal space in Epstein's anomaly. That's a very important point to remember when you are dealing with Epstein's anomaly. Of course, not the other types of low pressure TR. Next slide. When you come to auscultation, the first component is the tricuspid in Epstein's anomaly. The second component is the tricuspid, which can be markedly delayed and accentuated. And this you know it well, because in Epstein's anomaly you get a very markedly delayed. But because of right bundle branch block, the second heart sound may have an expiratory split but moves. If there is RV dysfunction, also the P2 may get delayed and may cause a wide split. Same thing in PH. If there is an acute pulmonary embolism or etc., you can get a RV dysfunction and delayed splitting of the second heart zone. Now, why there is split in RV dysfunction? The P2 is delayed. During exercise, the rising pulmonary artery pressure increases the isovolumic contraction time of the failing RV. This is only in severe PH with TR, and leaves the isovolumic contraction of the LV unchanged. So therefore, the widening of the S2 on exercise is a sign of PH as compared to normal pulmonary artery pressure. So if you get a widening of S2 on exercise, you are dealing with PH. Sometimes when you have RA myxoma, the P2 will occur earlier. Now this term, some examiners who are little, they always like to ask some vague questions, and they will ask, what is this non-paradoxical reverse splitting? So non-paradoxical reverse splitting, once they ask such questions, it means you have done well. They just want to probe further. So what is non-paradoxical reverse splitting? It is, the order is P2A2, but the split moves more on inspiration than on expiration. And this characteristically occurs in left bundle branch block with cardiomyopathy. So an excessive early P2 on inspiration can be suspected if a patient with known left bundle branch block has an apparently normal movement with a widely split S2. So this is just a little bit about non-paradoxical reverse splitting. And if anybody asks, you can always tell. Next slide. What are the diagnostic implications of these auscultatory findings? So when you consider the diagnosis of TR, the auscultative features can have important implications. And there are specific auscultation features which will help between MR and TR. That's the first differential diagnosis. TR, the presence of TR favors that a more severe grade of TR is present. And of course, you know that the MR murmur increases on expiration and the TR murmur increases on inspiration. But be careful. Sometimes when you see a MR murmur can also increase on inspiration, especially if it's heard in the lower left sternal border. This is just because of the rotation of the heart. And you'll find that this is diagnosed when all the sounds, everything increases on inspiration, then that is not a feature. So the inspiratory increase has to be shown. Next slide. So these are the key auscultation features, the TR murmur, and remember the P2 increases with standing, exercise, leg raising, etc. Especially with exercise, tells you that there is pulmonary arterial hypertension. Even if you don't feel the P2, sometimes you don't hear that, but if P2 increases with standing, exercise, leg raising, all this has to be done and shown that the P2 does not increase in low pressure TR. So that's an important point to note. Next slide. What are the prognostic implications of these features? It will be related to the severity of regurgitation. Naturally, it will be related to the presence, if there is pulmonary hypertension and right ventricular hypertrophy. So as far as TR is concerned, the mortality is highest among patients with severe TR, pulmonary arterial hypertension. But as far as low pressure TR is concerned, it's the RV systolic dysfunction, which determines the prognosis of these patients. So of course, nowadays we do measure the vena contracta. We'll come to that in the end if time permits. Next slide. The vena contracta is an important measurement if echo in cases of tricuspid regurgitation. Next slide. Now this is about tricuspid opening snap, which is not very well heard. But usually when there is MS and TS, that is MS and organic tricuspid regurgitation, the mitral OS usually occurs first because the MS is much more severe, making the left atrial pressure greater than the right atrial pressure. This is also one of the common questions asked. If there is MS and TS with the opening snap, which will occur earlier? But remember that the normal tricuspid valve opens first, but the tricuspid opening snap will occur later. And in Epstein's anomaly, tricuspid opening snap occurs late, not because of anything, but because the RV contracts poorly and also expands very poorly. Next slide. Coming to the right ventricular S3, a small point about right ventricular S3. It is louder over the right ventricular area, that is the left lower sternal border, or subxiphoid, which is the RV inflow position. It increases with inspiration. So this is a very important thing because we must auscultate with the bell in the subxiphoid area and show the increase of inspiration. And it's usually associated with a RV heave or rock, a large tubular wave, and a rapid Y descent. All these things have to coincide with an RV S3. Next slide. This is a graphic description of the murmur as well as the fall of the Y descent. Next slide. So the question is about the dynamic auscultation and the Carvelos sign, which again, I emphasize that you have to demonstrate it. If the patient is not very clearly seen when the patient is lying down, make the patient stand. So the murmur of TR remains louder on held inspiration, that is inspiratory apnea. And this is an important point. Remember that there are certain murmurs you have to auscultate while the patient breathes normally. There are certain murmurs you have to auscultate in apnea. That means one of the important murmurs is early diastolic murmur of aortic regurgitation. You'll have to make the patient stop his respiration. Otherwise, the AR murmur is confused with the respiratory sounds. But here, the murmur of TR remains louder on held inspiration. That is called as inspiratory apnea, simply because the intrathoracic pressure is kept low by lung expansion and more blood returns to the RV on inspiration. Next slide. Sometimes there is a lack of inspiratory rise of TR murmur, and this is a very important sign because it helps you to grade the severity of tricuspid regurgitation. So the presence of RV failure or presence of severe tricuspid regurgitation will cause the inspiratory increase in regurgitation volume incapable of increasing the murmur loudness. Sometimes decreased vital capacity. Sometimes the inspiration will lower the pulmonary vascular resistance so that the RV can easily eject the blood into the lungs. So you will not get the TR increasing. So these are the conditions where the inspiratory rise of the TR murmur does not occur. The RV damage and is functioning on the plateau of the Starling curve. So that also will not cause the TR murmur to increase. So this is the important thing about the lack of inspiratory murmur. So the differential diagnosis, next slide. The differential diagnosis of auscultation. Can we go to the next slide? Next. The auscultation differential diagnosis of the same systolic murmur, as I told you, are two mainly: mitral regurgitation and ventricular septal defect because of its location. And other things can occur like aortic stenosis, pulmonary valve stenosis, dilatation, and increase of the murmur across the valve. So these can occur and cause a differential diagnosis of the TR murmur. Next slide. So this is just summarizing what we said, but trying to put across what is mild TR, what is moderate TR, and what is severe TR. Always keep in mind the guidelines of 2014 about progressive and mild, moderate, asymptomatic. That is more comprehensive. But for our clinical use, we keep these features. Mild TR is when the JVP shows V waves only. And of course, you do see an X, which is greater than Y. But again, X may become very small. The liver will not have pulsations. There's only a pansystolic murmur in the lower left sternal border and in the subxiphoid area. There is a high frequency, could be mild TR, and may be audible only on inspiration. And it may have a whoop or a honking character. And there is no change in the intensity, the sudden long diastoles in atrial fibrillation or following an ectopic V. In moderate TR, that is that depends upon the pulmonary arterial hypertension, and also in low, it may show a V wave, which increases on inspiration. But again, although we say RV is compensated when the X descent is equal to the Y descent, it's difficult to make out. There may not be any X descent at all. But more important, you can look at the systolic pulsations of the liver, which also increases on inspiration. And then you have a pansystolic murmur, which shows the characteristic Carvalho sign. Next slide. When the TR becomes very severe, then it shows a very tall V waves. Of course, if the RV dysfunction due to pH, then the X descent becomes less than Y. It is difficult to make out because everything is gone with a severe TR. The liver has systolic pulsations, but inspiration will have no effect. And the pansystolic murmur also, as I told you, will fail to increase on inspiration. So this is an important thing to remember and grade it as mild, moderate, and severe TR. This is also useful in patients of mitral stenosis when you are asked to grade the secondary to pulmonary arterial hypertension. Next slide. Sometimes you may have to bring out a TR murmur to either by straight leg raising or by a right upper quadrant pressure, like performing a hepatojugular reflex. And this can bring out murmur. This is particularly useful in right-sided infective endocarditis where the murmur is not at all heard. And sometimes you may have to press over the liver and a deep inspiration. This can bring out a TR murmur if it is not heard. But of course, such a severe TR will usually be heard. Next slide. The important thing, as I told you, is the decrescendo. The TR murmur is not a pansystolic murmur if it is due to low pressure TR. This is simply because the high V wave, which is generated in the massive TR, will abolish the gradient between RV and RA in either in early or mid diastole. This is just like a decrescendo murmur which you get in acute MR on the left side. The high V wave in the LA will abolish the MR murmur. Similarly, the high V wave in the RA will abolish the murmur. And it can also occur due to ruptured papillary muscle in the RV. This can occur due to RV infarction, which can occur. And sometimes there is severe TR by Doppler. And this you always see that you are getting TR murmur by Doppler, but there is no murmur heard on the patient. This discrepancy is because of characterized by low peak velocities and laminar flow. There is a candle flame pattern on color Doppler, and low velocity suggests severe myocardial dysfunction. And the murmur is definitely not secondary to pulmonary arterial hypertension. So this is an important thing to remember between the discrepancy of TR on Doppler, which so often we see. We do get TR murmur, but we see TR on Doppler, but we don't have a TR murmur. And of course, the differential diagnosis of TR murmur is important. And as I already told you about this, about the MR murmur mimicking TR murmur, this is possibly due to some rotational phenomenon. So the TR murmur may be loud at the apex, and this is where it gets confused. And the RV occupies the apex. It is accompanied by lateral retraction. Sometimes, if there is a left parasternal heave and it extends to the apex in severe PHTR, you may confuse it with the LV type of apical impulse. Often it is there at the examination, but lateral retraction will help you to find that there is the whole thing is RV. You can use a Valsalva maneuver. We can use pure vasopressor, which we don't use at the bedside. We can use what is known as transient arterial occlusion by tying BP cuffs, which increases the MR murmur, but will not affect the TR murmur. And of course, amyl nitrate is again not being used in our country. Next slide. Next one. So this is the tabular column which differentiates TR from MR. The holosystolic murmur murmur location, the Valsalva maneuver. There is an increase with hand grip, which I forgot to mention, that is of the MR murmur, and increase of inspiration, which is characteristic of TR murmur. Next slide. And this is, of course, the causes of primary TR. We have already dealt with that. Remember, pacemaker defibrillator leads are a differential diagnosis of primary TR. Similarly, RHD with MS with organic TR is also sometimes low pressure, although very rarely it is low pressure. Most of the time it is associated with severe pH. Next slide. So this is just etiology of the tricuspid regurgitation. Next slide. We'll go through some of these slides a little rapidly because of lack of time. Next slide. And these are the primary causes, the secondary causes, which I said already. I have included that, including rheumatic, carcinoid, EMF, traumatic, infective endocarditis, dilated cardiomyopathy, etc. Next slide. One of the commonest cases which is kept in the exam. Next one. Which is kept in the next one. Next slide. You can go to the next slide. Before we come to blunt trauma, one of the commonest causes of the low pressure TR, which is kept in the examination, is perhaps an endomyocardial fibrosis. It's rare, but if it occurs, it is kept in the examination. There, sometimes you can have MR also, and because you can have biventricular type in the, it's like a restrictive cardiomyopathy. Now, if you have, these are some of the causes which can give rise to problems. We won't go through in great detail, like blunt trauma. Next slide. After endomyocardial biopsy, which is very rarely done. Next slide. And these are some of the pictures after of tricuspid regurgitation. Next slide. So coming to the key teaching points, what are they? That is, auscultatory findings of TR correlate with the murmur grade, and mild TR can be clinically insignificant. TR has got a Carvalho sign. It decreases in intensity with hand grip, and it can be confused with MR murmur. And of course, echocardiography is the most important one. And differential diagnosis of pulmonary arterial hypertension has a pH with TR has to be entertained. Next slide. We'll skip this. Next slide. Now let us go to ECG. Physical examination has been done, and we'll go to ECG. Now, ECG shows a characteristic change, and this is where they will ask you to look at the ECG of a patient with low pressure TR. It will show an incomplete right bundle branch block, and it will show a Q wave in lead V1. Always look at this Q wave in lead 1, because this is where the examiner always asks this question in the presence of atrial fibrillation. Next slide. Next one. So this is the question which is asked: what is P tricuspid? In sinus rhythm, if you have two peaks in the P wave and the second peak is taller than the first, then it is called as P mitral. If you have a rapid upstroke and a rapid downstroke, it is called as P pulmonary. But if you have a first peak of the P wave, which is taller than the second, it is called as P tricuspidary, because the right atrium here is enlarged compared to the next slide. Now, if you see V1 like this, the little older slide, if you see V1, you have a QR complex. Now, the QR complex in V1 is a sign of, could be, of course, sometimes they have corrected transposition, but that we are not concerned now. A QR complex in V1 tells you that there is a right atrial overload pattern. It is particularly useful. Next slide. Here, if you see the full ECG, next slide, please. Next one. The full ECG will show you this QR complex in V1. Of course, if you see a big P wave, as you see here in V1 or in lead 2, then you are sure it's right atrial overload pattern. But if there is atrial fibrillation, and if you don't see any P waves, then the presence of QR pattern in V1 tells you that you are having a right atrial overload pattern. Next slide. And this is the genesis of that. If somebody asks you, this is because the septum becomes very horizontal. When the right atrium is dilated, the septum becomes completely horizontal. And what was V1 in the high septum is now showing a QR pattern instead of a RS pattern. This is the genesis of the QR pattern in right atrial overload. Next slide. So it is a QR in the right atrium. If you have a atrial fibrillation, the right precordium will show a QR pattern, that is V1. It is highly correlated with a markedly right atrium. And the next is what is known as a QRS amplitude. A QRS amplitude ratio of V2 to V1 of 4 or more is also representative. This is from Shamrock. Is also representative of a right atrial overload. And this is particularly useful in patients with right atrial fibrillation. So the exam question is, how do you diagnose right atrial overload or right atrial enlargement in a patient with atrial fibrillation? Answer is a QR pattern in V1 and an increase of the R wave from V2 to V1 of more than 4. How do you diagnose the left atrial overload in patients of atrial fibrillation? It is a coarse atrial fibrillation with individual F waves more than 2 millimeters size. On radiography, important things of TR is marked cardiomegaly. Just like pericardial effusion, you will get a differential diagnosis. A right atrium becomes very prominent. There is evidence of elevated RA pressure. There's a distension of the esophageal veins, which is sometimes seen, and there is a pleural effusion. And sometimes you get an ascites, and many times you get an ascites with an upward displacement of the diaphragm and systolic RA pulsation. So that is about radiography. Next one, this is the characteristic, next one, X-ray picture of marked RA dilatation. Just like pericardial effusion, this will resemble. There are only differential diagnosis of endomyocardial fibrosis, severe MS with TR or low pressure TR. Next slide. Okay. Now coming to the hemodynamics, little bit of hemodynamics when you do cardiac catheterization, although nowadays it's not asked because of echo, you will find that the RA and RV end diastolic pressures are often elevated in TR, whether the condition is caused by organic disease of the tricuspid valve or it is caused by a right ventricular systolic overload. The RA pressure tracing will reveal, as I told you, an X descent or a prominent absence of the X descent and a prominent V or CV wave. An absence of these findings usually excludes moderate to severe tricuspid regurgitation. So as the severity of TR increases, the contour of the RA pressure pulse increasingly resembles that of the RV. So RA and RV will almost show, and the most important, as I told you, is the estimation of the pulmonary artery pressure. The pulmonary artery pressure, RV systolic pressures less than 40, although the definition is less than 55, we are very sure that we are dealing with primary or low pressure TR. Next slide. And this is the severe TR, which shows a deep wide descent. Remember that this resembles a constrictive pericarditis very much, except that you have a deep wide descent without at all V wave in patients of constrictive pericarditis. Next slide. And this is the 2D echo. We won't go into details. Next slide. And this is the MS with organic TR. And we'll skip prevalence. Next slide, please. Keep going because we are, next one. And of course, tricuspid valve endocarditis is quite rare. It's not kept in the examination. Next slide. And these are all the other causes. Just for completion's sake, I will put next slide. With a device which is not very uncommon, serotonin-like active drugs. Next slide. Next. And those rare causes. Next slide. Carcinoid heart disease is important. We don't see much, but anyway. And mediastinal irradiation. Next slide. And of course, endomyocardial fibrosis. Next slide. Which is in India is it's quite rare. Even in Kerala, it has come down. Endomyocardial fibrosis. Next slide. And this is the congenital causes, and the important thing is Epstein's. Next slide. And of course, the echo. Next slide. I'll skip this because except that in one thing is inferior vena cava dilatation of more than 2 centimeters and a systolic flow reversal in the hepatic veins is important. Next slide. Next one, please. This is just about the effective regurgitant orifice area. A vena contracta larger than 0.7 centimeters will indicate severe tricuspid regurgitation. Next slide. These are just from the books about the TR Doppler. We are not discussing that in great detail. Next slide. Now, these are the last two slides, and this is the tabular column, which is important in terms to differentiate low pressure TR and high pressure TR. This can also be used, when a theory question comes on low pressure TR and differentiating. So first is symptoms, where there is no dyspnea, PND, abdominal distension, pedal edema, and fatigue are more important in low pressure TR, whereas in high pressure TR, you may have symptoms of MS like PND and dyspnea. And of course, you can have some giddiness and syncope. The JVP shows a CV wave, although it's a little difficult to differentiate based on the JVP, but A wave, if it is prominent, and there is, it's likely that we are dealing with pulmonary artery hypertension. The pulse may show atrial fibrillation, whereas in high pressure, it's likely to be normal sinus rhythm. Again, it may not be 100% correct because in MS, you do get atrial fibrillation. The most important is the apical impulse. The RV occupies the apex and there is lateral retraction. Whereas here there is a left parasternal heave. Even though the RV may occupy, there will be a sustained left parasternal heave and there will be an apical impulse. There can be a lateral retraction, but the sustained left parasternal heave is a very important thing. Whereas in low pressure TR, it's a retraction. And of course, P2 is again most important sign. It is not palpable. And whereas high pressure TR, it is definitely palpable. But having said that, there may be many reasons where you can't feel the P2, even in pulmonary artery hypertension. So you have to use other methods, which I just described. The pulsations can be felt. It is definitely PA. Next slide. Thrills, of course, you do get a systolic thrill in a low pressure TR. Thrills are rare in high pressure TR. The subxiphoid area is an important area for palpating. Systolic right atrial pulsations occasionally can be felt, etc. There's some problem in the numbering. But anyway, coming to thrills, systolic thrill is felt. The subxiphoid area has a RV systolic pulsations. And remember that the RV systolic pulsations, which you see in the subxiphoid, is immediately transmitted to the liver in low pressure TR. And the first heart sound may not differentiate. Of course, if it is loud, can be due to MS. The second heart sound also may not differentiate strictly. RVS3 is best heard in the subxiphoid area, whereas in PAH severe, you can hear an S4. The important thing is a pansystolic murmur, where you get a decrescendo murmur in low pressure TR, whereas you get a truly pansystolic murmur in a high pressure TR. Of course, the ECG may not differentiate between the two, but the chest X-ray may show a massive cardiomegaly. Thank you so much. And now we are ready for questions. I think I have finished in time.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for your very lucid and very clear talk on low pressure TR and the causes now to differentiate with the high pressure TRs. I think if there are any questions, Sumod, if there are any questions in the chat box, we can ask sir regarding the any questions with answers which need to be answered by Professor Balachander.
Sir, the definition that was used for defining low pressure TR was the RVSP up to 56. So can
55.
P2 be equal to A2 or so based on the P2, P2 may not be palpable, but can P2 be equal? Some loudness of the P2 will rule out a low. Apart from the TR murmur, there is nothing else. But there is a P2 that is well heard as good as A2. then sometimes we can be
Yeah,
confusing whether it's PHTR or it is low
yeah.
pressure.
If you, when you're, what you're trying to say is very correct, because when you take about palpability of the P2, it may not be a point, but the audibility of the P2, that means the P2 as good as A2 and also heard at the apex, is a feature of pulmonary arterial hypertension. And sometimes even with the pulmonary arterial pressures of 55 or less than 55, you can hear singing. One classic example in congenital heart disease is ASD, where you can hear the P2 at the apex, even when the pulmonary arterial pressures are normal. So, but still, they have used this definition of 55. Some people say 40 with the definition of low pressure TR.
Sir, also, sir, you clearly told that the earliest sign, earliest symptom of
Congestion.
heart failure is right heart failure is the
Upper
epigastric,
quadrant.
right epigastric pain. So, if we ask what will be the earliest sign to appear, is it the JVP, and what is the last sign to go once you start giving diuretic?
Actually, this clinically, we are stuck with this, that the earliest sign to go will be when you start giving diuretics, will be the JVP. Many times we have patients who don't have any JVP elevation simply because they are administered large amounts of diuretics, and but that is really related to hypovolemia. It is not related to the RV dysfunction. So the most important sign which will probably decrease when the RV function improves would be perhaps the murmur may decrease in intensity.
Sir, there's one
The last to
question.
go will be, of course, yeah.
In the presence of a significant tricuspid stenosis, can left atrial pressure increase significantly to cause left sided OS to occur early? Because it's the textbook, the classical teaching is the proximal stenotic lesion usually mask the features of distal stenotic lesions.
Very true, very true. It can increase. Let me tell you one concept in JVP also. It is called as atrial Bernheim effect. We know ventricular Bernheim effect. Atrial Bernheim effect in severe acute MR can cause a high V wave in the JVP. And this is one of the signs. It's rarely observed. It's more theoretical, perhaps. I'm not sure. Of course, if the septum is open, you can hear, but it is called as atrial. So it is an interdependence, and it's clearly seen even in endomyocardial fibrosis when you see the cases.
Is it because of the opening of the PFO in such situations, sir, where LA pressure is too high?
Yeah, it could do, but usually the RA pressure which opens the PFO better than the LA pressure.
Yeah, LA pressure, yes.
RA pressure only opens the PFO most of the time.
So, though it's not pertaining to the present today's lecture, there's one question: when to subject the patient for tricuspid annuloplasty in low pressure TR situations?
40. That annular diameter, we go by that standard definition of 40 here. I don't know, you must be also going by that, and
yes,
will suggest that.
Sir, generally it is taught that we will not see JVP because of the voluminous RA, the atrialized RV of Epstein. So, it is true always we will never see JVP in Epstein?
No, actually, that is not a thing. As you know, the Epstein's is divided into 3 types, clinically at least. The old article by Kumar et al. Is there. One is called as a predominant tricuspid stenotic type. The second is a predominant tricuspid regurgitant type. And the third is a mixed type with tricuspid stenosis and tricuspid regurgitation. If you have a tricuspid stenosis type, which is predominant, although the RV is also hyperplastic, still you may see some JVP in Epstein's. And although the TR is hypodynamic and the RA can accommodate the TR, but still there comes a time when there will be a rise in the RA pressure beyond that, and you may be able to see the JVP. And if the PFO opens like it does, then you will be able to see the left-sided pressures in Epstein.
So you told classically about those endocardial reps in low pressure TR, sir. Are there any situations other than this where you can get this kind of endocardial reps, sir?
Actually, the diastolic rubs you get in diastolic rub you get in Epstein's, you get in TRs, you get a rub-like feeling in ASD when there is a large left to right shunt, particularly if there's glutabash is associated with that. And of course, in hypercirculatory states like thyrotoxicosis, etc., you can get a means
lemon
systolic.
scratch. Yeah. Sir, one more question was regarding the venous corrigans. So, is it for a large A wave or a large V wave? That we confuse just with the venous corrigans.
Always they use. I didn't use the word venous corrigans because it's usually there's a confusion between the large A wave and the large V wave. But we would go in favor of a large V wave as a venous corrigans usually. It's still a little bit of a confusion is there about that, but it depends on the examiner what he feels.
Sir, isolated RV cardiomyopathy as a cause of low pressure TR. How how common is it, and what is the usual mechanism that is responsible?
This isolated RV cardiomyopathy was reported. Actually, the first reports in idiopathic RV cardiomyopathy came from Dr. Talwar at the All India Institute of, when he said it's a form of endomyocardial fibrosis, predominantly involving RV. But subsequently, we have had RV cardiomyopathy, not the ARVD types, but it is the isolated RV cardiomyopathy. It is seen in a few cases, and it can be a cause of the. But generally, we don't. We think it is again endomyocardial fibrosis. I think, but now endomyocardial fibrosis is going off, so we're not sure what we are dealing with. But isolated RV cardiomyopathy has been reported in some series from the AIMS. And he's done some biopsies also. And he says it is an isolated idiopathic cardiomyopathy, not related to endomyocardial fibrosis also.
Another entity called as unguarded tricuspid valve, where there's no.
Yes. This I didn't mention. This is unguarded tricuspid valve, which occurs. It's called congenital tricuspid regurgitation. It's an unguarded tricuspid valve where there is really only a primary abnormality of strain. It's not due to low pressure. It's not due to high pressure. It's only due to an unguarded tricuspid valve. Strangely, this unguarded tricuspid valve is associated with complete heart block. It's related. One small observation, I don't know whether you will agree, those who may be doing his bundle pacing, this Q in V1, which you are getting, isn't it? QR pattern in V1. It is actually a high septal depolarization. So when you are mapping for a high septal area, while his bundle pacing and you want to get, of course you use intracardiac, but if you get a Q in V1 in the place where you want to fit, I think you can screw the lead and try to see that you have done the high septal pacing. Not necessarily his bundle, but high septal pacing. Because now the problem with his bundle again is the stability of the lead.
Yes.
Most of the series is stable. The lead is not that stable. And it is falling, whatever it is. And even our septal pacing, the lead is falling from that position. But this is one of the, because I don't think there is an ideal lead as yet for this bundle pacing. Of course, pioneers of his bundle pacing will not agree on this. In fact,
I think the experience matters.
Dr. Pugadendi, who's Vijay Ravan, he's called. He worked with me only before he left for US. He's become a big shot in his bundle pacing. But he's done very well.
Sir, not directly related to the TR, but one common issue, especially in metastenosis evaluation, is when there is severe right-sided tricuspid regurgitation, one tend to have difficulty in evaluating the severity of metastenosis. You fail to get a good gradient at the mitral valve. So then we should always go, and then we really, I'm not able to really assess whether should we go for balloon dilatation or because there may be just a laminar kind of a flow, but the valve area by planimetry may be less than 1.
Less.
To decide about whether to go ahead or not, or keep waiting.
I think we should go ahead once the valve area is less than 1, and of course there is TR. TR may or may not come down, just like surgery. But I think if the pulmonary artery pressures are high, better to go ahead and reduce the pressures. Only problem is the septal, transseptal puncture with the dilated RA, and then we are not at the correct place and it gets thrown. All these small points of technical points will come. But I think it's better to go ahead. So,
Would you go
think
ahead with the tricuspid valve balloon dilatation also along with that? If there is organic tricuspid valve disease?
Actually,
Yes.
Actually, we published this in Indian Heart Journal long back, the MS ASTS, triple valve stenosis. We had at one point of time about 75 cases, but I don't think tricuspid valve dilatation was very helpful at all. We could dilate the AS successfully, we could dilate the MS successfully, but tricuspid valve using the same method, we were trying to dilate it on the way back, coming
Yes,
back
sir.
from
Yes,
the
yeah.
LA and putting it into the RV and trying to get it out. We were not very successful.
Is it all related to the size of the balloon which we are using? Because as
Could
such
be. We should use our traditional double balloon technique,
double
I
balloon,
think,
yes,
for
yes,
tricuspid valve. Because obviously the commissures won't get stretched
yes.
with like mitral valve.
Thank you so much, sir. And if you, Sumant, if you have any more questions to ask,
Thank you, sir. It was a very beautiful lecture, sir. Thank you so much.
thank you once again. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, sir, for having given his time for this lecture. And thank you, Sumant, for coordinating the session so wonderfully well. And thank you, Dr. Mohit, for having started such a beautiful initiative, which is actually, being watched from all around the India and helping our residents, be it DM or DNB course people. And I would take this opportunity to thank even Intras for their unlimited support for this program, which has been running successfully for the past more than a year now. And we would look forward for to meet you the next week with the hemodynamic session again, which would be an interactive one. Until then, take care, be safe, and good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.